Is trade still relevant? Is it needed? And how do you maintain trade ties in a world where obviously conflict has really escalated in the past 4 years? So perhaps, Minister, a question for you. Panama is known for trade. It has built your country, your society. How do you look at trade in 2026, knowing there's tariffs, obviously, all over the world, but also there is much more friction in the geopolitics?
Yes, good afternoon. Of course, the world could be worried about what's going on, tariff, sanctions, geopolitical tensions, but Panama has some capabilities that probably few countries in the world have, our canal. And then our canal is more than a passage. It is becoming a platform for trade. It is becoming a connector for global trade. And we are right now expanding the capability of the canal with many, many plans. The ACP, the authority of the canal, is going to invest in the next 5 years above $12 billion in 2 new ports, a gas pipeline, and also a reservoir for water. But I could say that so far, trade was based on efficiency. I think trade, because we are in a point of inflection, is going to be based on resilience and trust. And Panama offers predictability, legal security, and a lot of trust.
And just as a quick follow-up, however, of course, your country has a global infrastructure of key strategic importance, which is obviously the canal. But I wonder, do you find doing business, being involved in trade now, is it really much harder in terms of the politics, or would you go, actually, you know what, we were able to adapt, and Panama is an example of that. There are still ways to trade.
Yes, indeed. We need to adapt. The world is changing. You see the complication in the World Trade Organization, but probably we could, start doing things in a small scale. Plurilateralism in the region, for example. Panama just signed the Treaty of Mercosur as a ally state, but we are working slowly without any pause to become eventually full member of the Mercosur. Trade is the way to benefit economies, and Panama is willing and ready to be the connector. We have the canal, we have the geographical position, and we have the capabilities. And again, we have the financial stability. We are a connector of more than 180 maritime routes, 1,700 ports, more than 170 nations. So we are investing. We are ready to put our effort to maintain global trade in good shape.
Well, thank you so much. And perhaps a question, of course, for the three of you, Mr. Cormann, Secretary Grynspan, of course, Mr. Denton, you both lead organizations that are directly connected to trade and international cooperation. How much more difficult is your job now in 2026, Mr. Cormann?
Well, look, firstly, I would say that global trade has made a very significant contribution to global growth for some time. It has helped lift hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. It has helped drive very significant innovation. It has helped deliver better products and services at lower prices. It has driven innovation. It has helped businesses grow, and it has indeed underpinned very substantial growth. And I would expect global trade to continue to grow into the future. And let's be frank, there have been some very significant challenges in recent times. The COVID pandemic, for example, and global markets have adjusted very swiftly and have shown to be very resilient. Now, there are issues in the way the global trading system is operating, also in the context of shifting demand, in the context of some structural transformation, the digital transformation, the energy transition, and so on. There are issues around supply chain resilience, economic security, unfair market distorting trade practices, and these issues ought to be tackled. The reform of the international trading system to make it fairer and function better is important, but we ought to do so in a way that preserves the unquestionable economic benefits of open markets and rules-based trade. I think we need to connect more people from around the world to global markets and to global value chains, and we need to continue to support the global expansion of trade.
And Mr. Cormann, if I understand correctly, what you said is perhaps there was a form of negative zeitgeist, especially when the first part of the tariffs kicked in last year. But if I understand correctly, you're just saying there's a lot of appetite out there, and your expectation is actually trade indeed goes up this year again.
Well, look, I mean, I don't think that we have yet seen the full impact of tariffs, and I would like to think that what some of the developments last year have triggered is a lot of conversations that will lead to a better way forward. Bilateral conversations, multilateral conversations. How can we make international trading arrangements fairer and function better while preserving the economic benefits of open markets and rules-based trade? That is, to the greatest extent possible without trade measures, without restricting open markets and rules-based trade.
Well, thank you for that, Secretary Grynspan. The same question for you, and what's your overall analysis as we start a new year?
Well, let me first share good news, yes, because trade growth last year was 4%, was more than the global economy. So that was surprising in the environment of uncertainty and volatility that we had last year. And so the question is, why was trade so resilient? And I would say that there are two different sets of reasons. The first is short-term, let me put it that way. Well, first, because the worst case scenario didn't happen, and so it was beyond expectations. At the end, we don't have really an open trade war. We have negotiations. So tariffs are much higher, but there are negotiations between the US and China. Now there is an agreement between the U.S. and India, and there
so you think that was the best, because that's a very important point. In Europe, at times there is this expectation that there should have been retaliation on the U.S. You're saying not retaliating was a smart thing to do.
There was not open retaliation as we expected. So that is the first reason. It's true that there was some front loading, the dollar was weaker, and that helped. But there are structural reasons for the resilience of trade that I would like just to mention. First, services is what is really, pushing up trade. And services don't have tariffs. And so that really helps. Services is growing at a 9% per year. Second reason, AI, because the investment in artificial intelligence has also a trade component, and that was part of what we were able to see. Third, South-South trade. South-South trade is today a very significant portion of global trade, and South-South trade is growing at a 9% per year. And my last point is regional agreements. Regionalism is back. So we heard the president of the Dominican Republic, and we heard before also the discussion that happened. At the end, there is groupings in trade, and regional agreements or grouping agreements are within the rules of the WTO. So still, 72% of trade happens within the framework of WTO. And that is also good news. So these are more structural elements that I think will continue to be there also this year. We will see a weakening. I agree with Mathias, there will be a weakening in the rate of growth, but still very resilient with respect to the global economy.
Well, thank you for that. And Mr. Denton, perhaps as a follow-up question, we've seen the start of a trade war that never fully manifested in full. Well, you could look at the US and China and say there was a trade war, but it was resolved temporarily, perhaps. There's been the idea that countries need to adjust. The GCC and the EU panel, right at the start, they both said there's an incentive now to get deals done, regional trade. What do you think is leading this adjustment when it comes to global trade?
Well, first of all, a couple of things, and I fully agree with what Mathias was saying, and also Rebecca. I mean, the reality is that from our point of view, strategically, we always argued in the midst of the commencement of all this was de-escalation is really important, because basically a tariff trade war is actually an act of economic self-harm for a lot of economies. And what we actually offered to do was to argue the case domestically to give politicians the support not to retaliate. So de-escalation was important from our point of view. The other dimension was to stabilize. I mean, there's a lot of assets which actually exist which are not fully utilized anyway. I mean, there is the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which is one of the largest trade agreements in the world, but it's not fully utilized. There's the African Continental Free Trade Area. It's another very important agreement, but it's not fully utilized. In stabilizing the system, there's actually more value to be created from the existing assets. I'm just using those as examples. And then the other dimension was really revitalizing. And it's really using, I think, the challenges that people are seeing to refocus them on what's really important. Now, my job is not to defend the institution of the WTO, but it is actually to ensure the system that allows businesses to trade with confidence, interoperably, with predictability, and flexibly across borders to happen. And what we're seeing now increasingly is a focus on that regional dimension, but also building new tools to enable this to happen. In a funny way, the ICC creates and supplies the infrastructure that allows trade to exist. One of our jobs now is to look at where we are and reinvest in our own infrastructure. And we're doing that. We're actually running a roundtable tomorrow with the support of the UAE government and the Dubai Chamber, which brings together leaders from MENA, about how we can revitalize the global trading system. And we have a program, a compact, for trade, growth and jobs. And if I can just go back to what Mathias was saying, we also have to talk about trade in the context of the jobs and economic opportunity it creates. For too long, the actual promise of trade has been divorced from the reality, I think, of what working men and women need. If we can bridge that gap and focus on jobs, we're actually reflecting in many respects the aspirations of the US administration as well. So these are important things we're doing right now.
And on the WTO, just very briefly, I wasn't really planning on bringing it up because, it's always good to have a right of reply from the WTO, but since you mention it, what do you respond, however, to those who say, realistically, the WTO is finished? It doesn't work. The way it handles China is not acceptable.
But the numbers don't, the data doesn't support that proposition. That's a false narrative. I mean, as Rebecca says, 72%, and actually will go up this year, and the 72% is suppressed, is still actually operated through the WTO. Now, the WTO needs to reform. Now, that's a different issue. And it's not the Secretariat, that's the member states. And frankly, the point we're making is that what they need to do to get revitalization underway there is to work out a structured way of dealing with and integrating the end user, which is business, into the deliberations. It's too divorced in many respects from the reality of what business needs to enable trade.
Yes.
No, I completely agree with John. I think that, UNCTAD has been critical of some of the things of WTO, yes, because we are more at trade and development. Trade is not alone, it needs also, to expand the opportunities for everybody. And I think that there are certain rules that they have to be discussed within the WTO, and WTO needs to reform. I agree with John. But we are critical of some of the norms, but we need rules of the game for predictability and also for the small and medium-sized countries. The small and medium-sized countries, we cannot live only on the power game. We need a framework to really be able to thrive. And in that sense, we need a multilateral institution that will regulate trade.
So they need a sort of equalizer at the table, and that's what the WTO would be for. Minister, obviously I'm going to ask you a question. You have three bosses of three different institutions that are dedicated to trade, but my question to you is it still useful for you?
Which one?
Well, the many that you partake. You have the OECD, the Chamber of Commerce for...
Well, Panama announced last June that we would like to walk the path to eventually become member of the OECD. it is essential for a country like Panama that in fact has parameters and indicators better than some countries that are already part of the OECD. It gives Panama the display to present our country as a beacon of stability, of high standards, of transparency, attraction of investment. And for us, the OECD plays an important role, and we will do our job to become eventually a member. The World Trade Organization, I concur, it needs reform. The panel for mediations are not working. Probably we need the coalition of the willing countries that want to advance to promote trade. And we offer to the world our neutrality, our predictability, our connectivity, and the huge investment process that my country will suffer for the next 5 to 10 years. We are talking about probably $20 billion in a country of 4.5 million persons. That's a huge, huge positive economic shock. With the geopolitical war being changed, Panama could be a connector where we don't put emphasis on ideology, but on fair rules, on continuity, on resilience. Like I just mentioned, the globalization changed from efficiency to trust and resilience.
And can I ask you just a follow-up? We've been asking this question to many different government representatives. When you look at trade, do you go, we want to sign deals in block? You mentioned the Mercosur at the start of the conversation. Or do you go, some of them will have to be a mix, country to country, regional, or would you go ultimately, it will end up in blocks?
It depends. Our country is willing to sign deals with countries, particular countries, but also our president decided since the first day as a president to look to the south, and in less than a year we signed the Treaty of Estado Asociado, Associated States. And we're working step by step. We're negotiating the terms of references with each of the countries member of the Mercosur, and eventually Panama will be a full member of the Mercosur. Trading is the way to prosper. Trading is the way to connect between countries. Even with tariff, like Rebeca just mentioned, the growth of trade is very important. And for Panama, having the canal and the expansions of the competitivity of the canal with the ports, with the gas pipeline, with the new reservoir, and plus 2 new ports that we're going to build in the canal. Well, the one that just the Supreme Court, upheld inconstitutional from CK, Washington Mampoa. So Panama is prepared to be the great connector, to be the focal point for trade between Asia, Europe, and South America.
So you can work with everyone, the US, China, the Europeans, you don't see this as
no, we don't,
relations that can clash?
No, we want to promote trade regardless of the ideology.
Well, thank you for that. And now is perhaps final round of questions as we're running out of time. It's a sort of crystal ball question, but what do you expect to see in 2026? Is this a world that now adjusts to the big shocks that happened last year, that is able to find alternative ways to trade and maintain cooperation? Or would you say ultimately, no, we're heading into a world of volatility and it's going to be constant adjustment going forward?
Well, look, I think the world will continue to evolve as it always has, but I think if you see what has happened post, the announcements by the President of the United States in early April last year, there was a whole series of conversations and negotiations, and where things landed was actually not where things started. I would expect that there will be continuing conversations both bilaterally and within international fora. I think that the WTO will continue to be at the center of a successful rules-based global trading system. system, I do agree. I mean, the WTO does need to reform, and I think that conversation will continue. I think countries around the world, based on their experiences in recent times, will be more mindful of the need to diversify both suppliers and markets. I mean, I think in a context where supply chain resilience is a very important part of economic security on some key supply chains, I mean, I think that there will be an increased focus on that. But overall, I mean, I'm optimistic about the outlook for the growth of global trade.
Thank you so much, Madam. Yes.
Yes, I agree. I think that we will continue to see a restructuring of the global value chains. What worries me is investment, because foreign direct investment has been going down and is more and more concentrated in the developed countries and in very few sectors, especially AI. And so there is an imbalance in terms of investment with the other sectors. That worries me in the developing world, because without investment, we will continue to see a weakening of the growth rate of many of the countries that will need investment and trade to make it happen. And my second point is that the most vulnerable countries are facing today a tariff in the US, an average of 27%. That is much higher than in the developed world. And so they are really in a disadvantage. So my call will be to look more at the countries that are more vulnerable, that don't have the investment that they need, and that have too high tariffs to make it happen for their people. And that could be a factor of instability in some of the regions, and we need to be worried about it.
Thank you so much, Mr. Denton. We have to go, but perhaps in under a minute for 2026. I know it's a challenge.
No, it's absolutely fine. I mean, as Mathias says, look, the global trading system will continue to function. There'll probably be a slight tapering off in terms of some of the growth expectations. But I think the point that Rebecca just made is one that goes under the horizon or under the radar here. And one reason I'm in Dubai is because of the connectivity between the UAE and Africa. We are very present in Africa. This issue about vulnerable economies, I mean, in a way, middle economies, we can help them look after themselves. Advanced economies will work our way through. But we have got a real issue with fragile economies right now. And what we're calling on, what we want to work with Rebecca and others who actually think about these things at MDBs as well, is we need to have a special focus, a particular focus on an emerging crisis there, because the consequences of that will be security-wise and actually have broader ramifications. And that's something we want to work on as the private sector.
Well, thank you so much. And
okay, I just want to finish in a fragmented world. Neutrality plus reliability, it is an strategic advantage for trade.
Well,
Panama has both.
Well, thank you so much, and that was perfect in time. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for this session, being so generous with your time. And of course, please, a round of applause to our esteemed panelists. Thank you very much.